Welcome to another edition of the Hail to Michigan podcast. I'm filling in as host, Matt, and we don't have Ronnie again this week. Um, so I'm joined as always by Contown. How are you?
Doing good. Ready to eat some food this week. Watch some football. Get nice and fat on the couch, and hopefully I have some leftovers for any emotional eating that needs to be done late in the day Saturday.
Yeah, you know, I love having football on Thanksgiving for sure, but the games on Thursday and Friday are just they feel like torture because you can't even really watch and enjoy. You're just thinking about the Ohio State game. Like the game can have
Yep.
no relevance. It could be an NFL game, have no relevance to Ohio State,
hmm
Michigan, and that's just like all you can think about Thursday, Friday. So looking forward to that to Thanksgiving as well, and it's always. Despite the result the last however many years, I still think Saturday is the best day of the year. So
Yeah.
kind of my favorite, not just for Ohio State, Michigan. That's the main reason, but a lot of good rivalries kind of wraps up the college football season. Um, just always a fun weekend.
Yeah. This
Let's,
is I think Thanksgiving is an underrated holiday. A lot of people like to go right from Halloween to Christmas, but if you're a football fan and a food fan, and those are, I mean, two of the top five things in the world for me, this is just kind of a celebration of life this week.
oh yeah, it's my favorite holiday, but
Yeah,
yeah.
same.
Uh, let's get into Maryland a little bit before we dive deep into Ohio State. Pretty convincing victory for Michigan. It looked a little hairy there for a second. I believe it was 38-18
Yep.
when the announcers mentioned, if Maryland gets a stop here and like one play later, we hit Donovan Edwards for
Yeah.
his long touchdown reception. So tell me a little bit about what you saw from the Michigan offense on Saturday against Maryland.
Yeah. So, like you mentioned, it was a little hairy for a little while. It was not the cleanest performance, and like like we always do, we like to chalk some of that up to maybe looking ahead. Maybe they didn't spend the whole week on Maryland, but you had a breakout performance from Donovan Edwards. I think that's what everyone's going to look at. I think a lot of the skill guys had good games. I think Andrew Anthony had a good game. I think Roman Wilson made some plays, but obviously Donovan Edwards stole the show, and we finally got to see kind of the full deployment of him as a threat out of the backfield. And throughout his recruitment, we always knew that that was kind of like the special element that he brought to the table, in addition to being just a very good running back, straight up running back. He often got Alvin Kamara comparisons in high school for his ability as a receiver as well. So great week to see that come into play, because hopefully that gives Ohio State another thing to think about going into the game. I thought Cade played pretty well. You know, he had statistically one of his best performances of the year. And I think in terms of his pocket presence and then his ball placement, he had a pretty good game as well. So I think the passing game, did a good deal for Michigan. The run game was somewhat disappointing. I thought it was fine. It just wasn't a dominant performance. I think Maryland had some success with some of their alignments along the front. They've got a couple good players on the front. We talked about a little on the preview show. Haskins was a fairly quiet day from Hassan, but all in all, it was more than enough to get out of there 10-1 and get ready for the biggest game of the year.
Yeah, I thought the run game was good in spots. Donovan, for how much he did in the passing game, really wasn't too involved in the run game. I thought JJ being in there provided a few wrinkles. I know Hassan had, I think his longest run was off of zone read. Yeah, I agree. I thought Cade played pretty well. JJ did well in his few snaps. You look at it in total, it's 26 for 33 for 3 touchdowns and well over 300 yards. That's a pretty good day. It did not feel like a 500-yard performance.
No,
which was weird. I guess when I kind of looked at the box score after the game, I thought, wow, that is surprising to me that they had that many yards. But receivers in general, I think you keep seeing flashes from a number of them. We've seen it from Anthony. We've seen it from Mikey. Baldwin earlier in the season had a couple flashes. Cornelius, this is Cornelius Johnson podcast. Schoonmaker has had a few good games in a row here, catching the ball. All that Eric Gall didn't do too much, but we know what he's capable of. Hopefully that was just getting him healthy for this week. And hopefully they get Corum back too. So the offense in general, there's a lot. There are a lot of weapons on this offense, and being able to go into the Ohio State game with kind of a full plate, they've probably looked back at tape and seen, our split zone, which hasn't really been the staple the last few weeks, the pin and pulls, the stretch, whether that's, any of the 3 running backs, the counter scheme stuff, which Corum seems to be real effective at. And then in the passing game is, who do you key on when it seems like a different guy every week? So overall, offensively, it was a very efficient game. I felt like they consistently moved the ball against Maryland. Let's talk about the defense just for a little bit. A little bit hairy there for the running game of Maryland. We talked, on last week's podcast, and then before the game, we were not expecting really much of anything from their running backs. Their run game had been kind of non-existent. And they did put up 181 yards on Saturday. So tell me a little bit about what you thought about the defense from last Saturday.
Yeah, so we made it a point to call out how bad Maryland's run game was, and they promptly ran for, I believe, 180 yards in the game this past weekend.
181.
Yeah, so and that's, Michigan had maybe, I don't know if we had 2 sacks on the day, but we didn't have many sacks. So it was a successful day. If you told a Maryland fan before the game that they were going to run for 180 yards, I think they'd feel pretty good about their chances. But I think a lot of it was, we played with very light boxes, and Maryland is a team that in the passing game, they like to get the ball out quickly and get it on the perimeter pretty quickly. And then they'll incorporate some RPO looks in with the run game to play off the run game. So I think we did a lot of things like with the edges, especially with Aiden, where we knew that he wasn't going to have just like a typical pass rush setup that he would get on a team that likes to drop back and throw the ball more regularly, throw the ball downfield more regularly. So we did some things where he was kind of keying on the wide pass, and he made some 2 plays especially stood out to me where he was chasing the screen out wide, and he and Dax actually kind of combined to make the stop out on the perimeter. And then I think we were also kind of keying on the RPOs to kind of prevent the big plays. So we were playing with lighter boxes, and I think we were content to let Maryland run a little bit. I certainly don't think we were intending to give up 180 yards on the ground. But oddly enough, I think it was a good game from Mazzy. Um, he seems to be. I think it's safe to say that he's kind of arrived as one of the dudes on this defense. There's a couple other guys on the interior. Chris Jenkins stood out to me on one play. We've seen Donovan Jeter get extended run here in recent weeks. So, weirdly, I didn't feel too bad about the run defense this past week. Despite the total, I think Maryland schemed up a couple things that were pretty good. And, at the end of the day, Michigan got off the field when they needed to, especially if Maryland was trying to convert third and fourth downs with on the ground. Michigan had success in the key moments. So kind of a mixed bag on the ground for the Maryland offense. Definitely some positives and more success than we anticipated. But I think that part of that was also Michigan's game plan for that offense.
Yeah, I'm glad you noted the Hutchinson play on the edge. That was kind of a concern going into the year, and we had talked about what they would do. I at least anticipated that one of the outside linebacker, edge roles would be more of what DJ Durkin did with what he called the buck, which was more of just a defensive end that stood up. And I anticipated that being Aiden, and it kind of has been. A lot of people were worried about him carrying the tight end or playing in coverage, and he has done that a little bit. But it's been so infrequent throughout the year. And he did make the play you're talking about was one of those examples where he made a good play out in space in more of a true outside linebacker role than a defensive end style role. So he played well again, despite not having a sack. That one of the short yardage examples, I still don't, we talked about this. I think you brought it up actually, that, blocking him with a tight end is not a good idea. And he completely blew that up. They just tried to do a little bit of an inside zone and have that tight end cut off Aiden, and Aiden tossed the tight end. The tight end almost made the tackle on the running back.
Walked him back into the running back. So,
I think Mozzie played very well again. Hinton flashes so much. Like some of the plays, down the line, or maybe he rips through a guard, and like his pursuit on the quarterback, his acceleration for his size is elite. I mean, there is a very clear reason he was a 5-star level prospect. He just needs to do it a little bit more consistently. And again, as we've mentioned, both him and Smith are third-year guys. They should be playing well. They are. Smith has been a little bit ahead, I think, in consistency, which I would have disagreed with a few weeks ago. But Hinton shows the flashes. I think both of them are going to be tough to deal with for opposing offenses come next year. And they're already good players, but they both have pretty special potential. Pass game a little bit. I thought I almost called him Tua. I thought Talia missed a couple shots. I think they schemed open some guys pretty well, especially kind of down the seam, kind of behind the linebacker level. But overall, they held him way under his season average. He looked confused a number of times with blitz packages or coverages that we were using. I thought overall against their passing attack, I thought it was another, passing grade, on the test. What were your thoughts on Maryland's passing game?
I think you said it. I think Talia looked confused quite a bit when they were successful in getting it out to the perimeter in the quick passing game. Michigan had the athletes to snuff that out pretty quickly and consistently. And then, like you mentioned, when they did scheme things open downfield, Talia missed on him a couple times, and a couple of those occasions were because he was moved off his spot or felt rushed potentially by the pass rush. The one red zone trip that stands out where they they had 2 touchdowns schemed open. Sitting and watching from my couch on the TV, I knew where they were going pre-snap. With the one they bunched the tight ends and to the short side, and it was pretty clear that they were gonna try to mess with I think it was Gray and Hawkins were the D-backs to the boundary side there, and they were just gonna pick which receiver. The tight end was wide open, and it was kind of a busted coverage. But they got 2 of those in the red zone, and they should have hit one. And I think Talia overthrew both. So, Maryland left a few opportunities, but in large part, Michigan was successful against what is a pretty good passing offense. I mean, Maryland is throwing for a lot of yards every week. One of the maybe the main issue they've had this year, outside from injuries in their defense, is just not turning the yards in the air into points. We see them make mistakes, whether it's penalties or overthrown balls like we saw Saturday, but they have weapons, and I think Michigan handled them pretty well. I think we saw another good game from DJ Turner. Obviously he has the pick 6, but between him and Rod Moore and Dax, who's kind of been steady Eddie in the secondary, I think a good number of players on the back end for Michigan are peaking at the right time, and I think Rod Moore's emergence especially is really, really promising, considering the opponent we have coming up this weekend and just the future. The fact that as a true freshman, he's carved out such a role in on the back end of this defense is really impressive. So impressed with Turner and Moore against a good receiving core this last weekend. Maryland missed a couple things, but all in all, it was good performance from the secondary.
Yeah, Rod Moore specifically, it really changes things. I went back and watched this week, actually, his high school senior year highlights, and I'm a little surprised how well he's done in coverage. A lot of his true safety clips were kind of coming downhill and making tackles.
Mm-hmm.
But they've mentioned him as potentially being Dax's replacement in that nickel role. And with the way he's played this year, it's a true possibility. I don't know that will be the way they go, but that's kind of for the off season a little bit more. But yeah, his emergence has been big for this year and the future. And I think especially this week, if Moten is one of the guys that starts getting picked on a little bit, subbing in Moore is a nice change up to have there. Just from a personnel standpoint, to be able to go to a little bit more of a coverage style safety. Mm-hmm. Before we move on to Ohio State, we have to give a shout out to Jay Harbaugh. We've mentioned, in our conversations off the air here that some of our best offensive players are on the team as a result or because of Jay Harbaugh. The special teams units have really been good since Harbaugh. Jim has been there. And Jay's been involved the whole time, and he's been the coordinator for at least 2, and maybe the assistant coordinator for 1 year. Mm-hmm. When you get a block punt and a kick return touchdown in the game, you can't do much more than that. Oftentimes the kickers and punters, I don't know if that's necessarily the special teams coordinator's, job. It's part of his job, but it's not necessarily their forte. They're where you notice a good special teams coordinator when the schemes are good, and Michigan seems to scheme a punt block or potential punt block nearly every week. It was clear they saw something with Maryland on the kick return, and they've had gotten a few other advantages dating back to when they pooch kicked almost all year. I want to say it was 3 years ago now. to get opposing field position inside the 20
Yeah.
pretty consistently. So shout out to Jay Harbaugh. He, for as much crap as he gets from fans and has got from fans, he's a pretty important piece of the staff. And you could certainly make an argument that he's one of the top assistants on the staff. So good all around performance. Let's transition over. Obviously, Ohio State, biggest game on the schedule every year. They come in with one loss. They lost to Oregon. I think a lot of us watched that game, and they were kind of outplayed all day. It felt like Oregon really controlled that game. And that team since then hasn't been lights out, but they've been very good, especially offensively. The defense has gotten better, but offensively they've really taken off, especially here in the last part of the season. They absolutely destroyed Michigan State last week. It was a terrible matchup for Sparty. Let's get into the Buckeyes a little bit. Let's talk first about Michigan's offense against Ohio State's defense. As I mentioned, the defense has gotten a little bit better. Tell me what you've seen from the Buckeyes and kind of the attack that you expect Michigan to use against their defense.
Yeah, so you mentioned after it's kind of been all upward trajectory since the first 3, maybe 4 games for Ohio State. There were some signs of some cracks in the armor against Minnesota. Even in the first game, Minnesota had quite a bit of success against Ohio State, and the game was probably closer than a lot of Ohio State fans thought it should have been for a majority of the game. And then obviously it came to fruition next week against Oregon. But even in subsequent weeks, like against a Tulsa offense that wasn't super great. I mean, Tulsa lost to an FCS opponent in week 1 this year. Tulsa had some success against this Ohio State defense as well. So they've been figuring some things out, like personnel wise, especially at linebacker. But they kind of used the weak start to their conference schedule to get right, and they're starting to look like a more typical Ohio State defense. As of late, they changed the play caller from Kerry Coombs, who is still the defensive coordinator in title at Ohio State, started the year calling plays for them. It's now Matt Barnes, who I didn't realize this. You pointed out before we hopped on air here, was previously a assistant, a GA at Michigan under Durkin, and followed Durkin to Maryland. So he's got some familiarities with Michigan and defenses that Michigan has run in the past, and is a younger guy. So he could be someone that runs this defense for a few years here for Ohio State as they've improved quite a bit. It's kind of feels like a defense that has a ton of athletes that are kind of they're figuring out how best to use them at times, positionally what's best for them, schematically what's best for them. It's a lot of talent and it's a lot of speed. They're going to be mostly a 4-2-5 type look with a lot of cover one high, but we were talking on air, they kind of will start in a lot of 2 high, and they'll play 2 safety personnel, but they'll roll that down into a 1 high look. The weakness of the defense has really been up the middle most of the year. The linebackers, we mentioned, at the beginning of the season when this defense was struggling, the linebackers were largely the culprit. They've changed some things schematically to help their linebackers, but it's still not the best linebacking crew that Ohio State has ever had. It's a unit that can probably be picked on a little bit on Saturday. I also think the interior of the defensive line isn't spectacular. Like Teron Vincent, the one defensive tackle, is pretty average from when I've watched him. I believe he's a former 5-star from IMG. Am I thinking of
Yes.
the right
Yep.
recruit. Yeah, out of Maryland initially, but went and played at IMG. Um, he's a I think he's a third year guy. But so he's still probably ascending. His dad was an NFL player, so he'll probably end up being a good player. But I think he's been kind of average this year, as the whole kind of middle of their front seven has been. Um, yeah, on the back end, they've got good athletes in the secondaries, but I don't think similarly to their linebackers, I don't think this is the best secondary Ohio State has had in recent years. The corners are okay, and I think the safeties are probably above average, but not great. So it's a unit as a whole that's certainly stock up on the rise for the last 8 weeks. But I think it's a unit that is maybe has a few more soft spots than the last 9 weeks of football might suggest.
Yeah, if you look at their Big Ten schedule after, I mean, I guess we'll include Minnesota. The only Big Ten teams that score over 21 on them are Purdue, Penn State, and Minnesota. Their scoring defense has been very good in Big Ten play. I agree that the linebackers can be messed with a little bit. They've switched so much personnel on the back seven. Terahata Mitchell's played, Cody Simon, Steele Chambers plays a bunch. Tommy Eichenberg, I think, is pretty much out of the rotation, but he was starting as of mid-season.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I think it was the Akron game. He had like almost all the defensive snaps at middle linebacker and didn't have a tackle. So it was either Akron or Tulsa. I can't remember which one. But in the true secondary, they've played Ronnie Hickman. One of their safeties got hurt, and Bryson Shaw came in for him. Cam Martinez has played a little bit in a reserve role. Lathan Ranson. I mean, they've played a lot of guys. They've played in their back four. They've played 7 or 8. In their linebackers, they've played 5. They seem to have settled in to this group a little bit more, just in the last few weeks. I agree that their defensive tackles, although Haskell Garrett he's not listed as a starter on our lads, but I've noticed him. I mean, he's on the field a majority of the time.
Yeah.
He's a player, but the rest of the interior is just okay. Their defensive ends are really coming on. Tyreek Smith in the last couple games that I've watched, which would be last week in Penn State, he has been rampant, all over the place. Harrison has gotten better. They've got JTT, Javante, Jean Baptiste, and Jack Sawyer. I mean, they are loaded on the edge. And while Harrison hadn't played all that well at the start of the year, he's gotten a lot better. So it's kind of the same, different guys, but the same kind of worry on the edge that we're used to at Ohio State. I really think that Michigan will try to attack the linebackers both in the run and the pass game. I think they'll try to play games with them a lot. You mentioned they play a lot of athletes. A lot of times, similar to Penn State, when you have more athlete than linebacker, Michigan tends to try to get a little bit fancy against that, and it's worked pretty well. So I expect that to be a part of the game plan. I really think people mention, and I don't disagree with this overall, shortening the game, and that allows for more variance when you're the less talented team. That seems to be the strategy, and I think overall, from a tempo standpoint, I think that's accurate. But I really think they can be attacked through the air. Penn State had guys running all over the place. You mentioned the Tulsa game. Tulsa put
Mm-hmm.
up 500 yards on them, and it was over 400 passing.
Yep.
And that's a 5-6 Tulsa team. I mean that was early in the season. But I think Michigan has the athletes outside to kind of take advantage of Ohio State a little bit in the passing game. So while I agree with shortening the game, I do think they'll need to do some of that through the air, despite most people expecting them to run the ball a substantial amount. I think they will still. I mean, that's their identity. But I also think that the Edwards stuff, you mentioned it when you were breaking down the Maryland game, that's coming at a perfect time. I mean, both he and if Blake Corum's healthy are a mismatch against these guys, especially if we get them locked in their cover one, their man stuff. Edwards' emergence in the pass game could be huge against Ohio State. If you remember, I want to say it was the 17 game. Chris Evans had a lot of success. That was, people complained about him catching the ball out of the backfield. I think it was the 17 game that was probably his best game at Michigan, catching the ball out of the backfield. I think that's that's a place that Michigan can take advantage of. It will be interesting to see that they're very talented on defense. It seems like their coaching has got them in more more advantageous situations defensively than what they were earlier in the year. But I do think, there are yards to be had and plays to be made against this defense. Protect the ball will be the most important thing. But overall, I think they can attack multiple different areas of this defense.
Yeah, they on a per play basis, their passing defense is kind of the nominal weak point of the defense now. In terms of national rankings, that puts them all the way down at 26th. So it's not like we're not talking about Michigan State's secondary here, but we're also not talking about some of the monster secondaries they've rolled out in the past with multiple first round draft picks on the back end. And they, part of playing in the Big Ten, they haven't played a ton of really potent passing attacks. Penn State was one of them, and Penn State threw for over 300 yards. So, I don't know that Cade is going to do that, or even that we want him to do that as part of the game plan. But if you told me that Michigan threw for 300 yards on this game on Sunday morning, I would guess that Michigan, maybe won or at least was in it until the very end. So yeah, definitely some opportunities there.
Yeah, and I think some of those players, they're relatively young on defense. Honestly, of their 11 guys, it seems to go like senior, sophomore,
Yeah.
From an eligibility standpoint. So they're relatively young. Some of those guys, Denzel Burke is going to be a great player.
Yeah.
He's already good as a freshman. But, like you said, compared to years past, it's a good defense, not great. So, and as you mentioned, they're still, SP plus, they're ranked the 14th best defense. So still not bad by any stretch, but not as dominant as some of the defenses we've seen in the past. Let's switch over to the other side of the ball. The side that everyone seems to be horrified of, especially after last week. Let's talk first about their run game, Ohio State's run game against overall, and then specifically against Michigan. Obviously, the star of the show is TreVeyon Henderson. They've got Mayan Williams is a very solid backup, and Master Teague still gets in a little bit more in garbage time. But talk about Ohio State's run game and what your thoughts are on that entering this weekend.
Yeah, so the passing game obviously kind of steals the show and gets the headlines in Columbus, and for good enough reason. But it's this run game should not be overlooked. This offensive line is fantastic, and they've got a true freshman, as you mentioned, in Henderson, that is already among the best running backs in the country. He was a guy that Michigan also identified very early, and he fell in love with Ohio State, and obviously, we both schools recruited Donovan Edwards, so it's going to be a fun little showdown between the two running backs that finished the cycle atop the rankings. Little history going back to recruiting there, but it's they can be as proficient on the ground as they are through the air. They tend to throw the ball more, and more of their splash plays tend to come through the air, but it's not for a lack of ability in the run game. It's going to be a zone heavy attack. It's a lot of inside zone, and they'll run a lot of split zone too. And their tight ends are good blockers. Jeremy Rucker is the starter at tight end. Another guy that Michigan really liked. I believe he was the number one tight end in the cycle, but been at Ohio State a while, having a very good career. He's a good receiver as well as a good blocker. And they'll hit you with a lot of zone and then bring Rucker to cross on split zone. And it's a really big offensive line. Pretty much all highly rated guys except for DeJuan Jones, who's the biggest among them. The right tackle is 6'8", 360. So, they count on their offensive line to, when they want to run the ball, they're going to run zone, and they're going to count on their huge and athletic offensive line to just move dudes. And we were talking before the show. A lot of people are worried about the passing game, but I do think Michigan's secondary is pretty good. Certainly a lot better than we thought it was going into the year. And I actually think the worst mismatch in this game for Michigan is the Ohio State offensive line running the ball against our front, and especially our defensive tackles and linebackers. We talked about Mozzie. He's really come into his own. Excuse me. Wow. Just hitting puberty in the middle of this podcast. I'm like barely recovering from whatever cold has plagued me since like the middle of October. So can't wait for a high of 33 on Saturday to probably keep the sickness rolling through Christmas.
Be sick for 3 months.
Yeah. But yeah, so Mozzie's been really good, and is going to be, I think, a great player next year. As you mentioned, him and Hinton should both be great players next year. But this is, I think, going to be the best offensive line that Michigan sees this year. The Wisconsin offensive line is still a good run blocking unit. It's not the best run blocking unit that Wisconsin has fielded in recent years, and it's a pretty poor or at least average pass blocking unit. And this Ohio State offensive line is it's really good in both run blocking and pass protection. I just don't think our defensive tackles have seen a unit like this yet. So, I'm more concerned about Ohio State's rushing attack than I am their passing attack. As weird as that sounds to Michigan fans or to anyone that's watched Ohio State this year, I think Michigan has the pieces and the scheme, the brains behind the operation to at least slow down the passing game somewhat. I'm not quite sure that we have the personnel or the correct bodies in the middle of our front seven to handle what is really a great offensive line that Ohio State's going to put out there on Saturday.
Yeah, I agree with that too. I think another thing, I think schematically, I think Michigan as you're alluding to there, I think they're going to play more of a conservative, keep everything in front type defense. And I think that kind of lends to a little bit of the running game for that, for Ohio State having success. Their offensive line, you touched on it quite a bit, ridiculously athletic. Thayer Mumford is playing guard for them, and he'll probably be a guard in the NFL. But you're talking about like an all Big Ten left tackle last year that's moved into guard to put out a more athletic guy in Nicholas Petit-Frere. Luke Whippler, I believe, or Whippler, I believe, was, if not the number one, a top 3 center in the country coming out of high school. Paris Johnson is a future NFL tackle, and he's playing right guard. They're just trying to get him on the field, and DeJuan Jones is as athletic as they come for his size at 360. So I think I'm with you. I'm horrified of their running game. I mean, their offense in general scares everyone, but I am scared of their run game. They always seem to run the ball very well against Ohio State or against Michigan. I think Henderson's the real deal, and I'm just a little worried they're going to control the game that way when everyone's expecting them to come in with a big, passing attack, which is obviously still scary, no doubt about it. But I'm with you on that. We talked a little bit before we hit record here. Both of us kind of agreed, so I'll just get into it a little bit. I'm anticipating a little bit more of the 5-1-5 look from a personnel standpoint for Michigan. They ran that quite a bit in the Wisconsin game, and that was a game, obviously, that you had to shut down the run game. So I think they feel confident that they can stop the run with that look. And I think one of the reasons to run out the 5-1-5 look, Junior Colson is the perfect linebacker for the future against Ohio State, but he's still young. He's a freshman, and he makes some freshman mistakes. 2 years from now, there won't be anyone in the defense that I'm more confident is a good matchup against Ohio State than Junior Colson. But right now, I'm a little concerned about them in the same way that we talked about attacking Ohio State's linebackers. I'm a little concerned about them attacking him, and I don't know that Nakai Hill-Green is quite the athlete to match up well against this specific team. I can see them kind of looking at it as more of a Mike Morris versus whoever, whichever will you want to take, whether it's Colson or Nakai, and them saying, okay, we can do a lot more with Morris, with his versatility. You get kind of a solid front 5 out there with Mozzie, Hinton, Morris, Ojabo, and Aiden. And you only have one linebacker out there that they can kind of manipulate a little bit with their scheme. So I do anticipate seeing that quite a bit. And then kind of the regular nickel personnel behind it in the backfield. Let's switch over a little bit to their passing attack. I think this is one of the few years that Michigan has come in with a pretty healthy defense all the way around. There was, I believe, the 15 game was the year that they were really thin on defensive tackles. 16, the defense was rampant and dominated the game. 17, that was kind of the younger defense. 18, the defensive ends were hurt. I think they're relatively healthy. I do think the Jamon Green injury, if he is still out, I think this game they'll notice that a little bit more than they have the last 2. The corners are improved. I think DJ Turner has played very well in Green's absence. I think Vincent Gray has been much better this year. But it's still obviously a concern. We joked last week about every week being the test until the big test. And we're at the big test. So tell me your thoughts on their passing game kind of overall, and maybe some specific matchups there, or what you expect Michigan to do to combat their They're excellent receivers.
So I do think we're going to see. Well, first of all, I agree that we talked about it some during the week, even that. Oh my gosh, I'm apparently slowly dying over here. But we talked some during the week that I think the 5-1-5 is kind of what you're going to see, especially on early downs. The other thing that does, aside from giving you kind of a more stout front against what's a great run blocking unit for Ohio State, it also is. It's the kind of mashup between your base defense and your nickel that gives you enough, defensive back firepower to go up against these receivers for Ohio State. I think we're going to see a mixture of different zone looks. And the name of the game is kind of going to be how, Mike McDonald has attacked other, the better quarterbacks and the better passing attacks we face this year is, trying to confuse the quarterback with what zone look he's getting on a play-to-play basis, who's dropping into what zone. Certainly Michigan doesn't have the dudes on the back end to go man-to-man and play, one high and just man up with these great receivers that Ohio State has. So, I think you'll see a bit of a, keep everything in front of you strategy. Michigan has run a ton of cover 2 and cover 3 this year. I think you could even see maybe some cover 6 this week with, half quarter. I think we talked about in relation to the Maryland game in the last couple weeks that the emergence of Rod Moore does a lot for this defense because he can take over the other high safety spot with a guy who's maybe a little bit better in coverage and a little bit faster on foot than RJ Moten is, who's he's a bit of a thicker dude and a guy who can come up and play in the box and help you in the run game. So it'll be interesting to see how they split time between the two of them. But I think it's going to be prevent the deep ball. Ohio State, they can do so much when you have the weapons, the number of weapons they have. I think their 4th or 5th receiver is Julian Fleming, who was like a top 5 player in his class. That's how deep they are. They ran off Jamison Williams this offseason, who is maybe going to win the Biletnikoff for Alabama. They just didn't have room for him. So it's a ridiculously loaded group. They love to run, a lot of stuff underneath. And then, they to find out what your safeties are doing, whether you're pattern matching, whether you're sitting in too high. And then once your safeties, are rotating up against the crossers and the underneath routes, they'll hit you over the top with the posts and the deep shots on the sideline. So they kind of force you to play vanilla, and they're going to bet, if you do that, if you do what I anticipate Michigan to do and try to keep everything in front of you with some of the cover 2 or cover 3 stuff, they're just going to bet that they can hit enough stuff underneath and let their athletes like Olave and Smith and Jigba run for enough yards after the catch to keep the chains moving. And it's a good bet. It's a bet that almost always works out for them. So it's a little bit pick your poison. I do think it plays. I do think the correct strategy, game theory, if you will, is for Michigan to try to cut down on the number of possessions in this game and make Ohio State use as many plays as possible on a drive. And hopefully once the field tightens in the red zone, a couple times you can get them to trade 6 for 3 and you get the you trade their 3 for 6 once you have the ball. But it's a tough task. You got to prevent the deep shot. You got to be disciplined with your safeties, and it's a tall order.
Yeah, you actually, I was gonna the next kind of segment I was going to go into were keys to the game for, a potential Michigan win. And you just kind of listed them all off: shorten the game. I had win the turnover battle. I think to win the game, they're going to have to win that turnover battle by 2. And I think they'll be right in it if they're, +1 in the turnover margin. I think they're going to need another big special teams play, which is going to be difficult because according to S&P Plus, the only special teams unit ranked ahead of Michigan's is Ohio State. And then I also had field goals, not touchdowns in the red zone. I believe Penn State, I'd have to go back. ESPN does a bad job with their red zone statistic, kind of those specific statistics, but I believe they were 1 for 6 Ohio State was 1 for 6 in terms of converting red zone opportunities into touchdowns against Penn State. Might be 1 for 5. But that is going to be huge, trading 6 for 3, like you said. They play a lot more 11 personnel this year, which, as you mentioned, running through the ridiculous receiver group makes sense. And their number 2 tight end is moved over from linebacker, Cade Stover. He was an excellent athlete in high school, but doesn't play a whole bunch. We're doing a lot of 12 personnel, especially end of Urban Meyer and kind of the start of Ryan Day. But they're doing a lot of 11 now with the 3 receivers out there more frequently, sometimes even 4. It's interesting, and I keep using the word horrifying, but in their last 5 games, Smith Jigba has been the leading receiver in 4 of them. And in those 4 games that he was a leading receiver, he had 570 yards total. And I'm not sure how much he had against Michigan State because he's not listed as the leader. But so I would assume he had at least 30. So we'll say he was over 600 yards in the last 5 games, which would be, I believe, Michigan's leading receiver.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's the thing everyone's talking about, especially after the Michigan State matchup. But their run game, I guess, is what concerns me a little bit more if you had to choose. But it's kind of like we were talking about the defense. When you're talking about advantages or strengths, weaknesses of a team of this caliber, you're really kind of splitting hairs. You're not necessarily, it's not that we're not scared of the pass game. Obviously, it's a very steep challenge for Michigan. I just think their run game seems to be a place where they may have an advantage as well. So, going to be a tall order for the defense. Any more thoughts on the whether it's special teams? You kind of mentioned a little bit of your game theory there. Any more thoughts on this game specifically?
No, just it's hard to I think it's hard to calibrate what like expectations should even be for Michigan in this game, because I think especially as a fan who is like older than 25 or 30, who remembers at least some of the 90s, and especially any Michigan fan that's older than that remembers a time where Michigan like could regularly bet on beating Ohio State. Was winning 2 out of 3 or 3 out of 5. But the change in these 2 programs in the last 20 years, it kind of changes how you have to look at this game. I was looking at the talent composite earlier today, and Ohio State is in that tier with Georgia and Alabama where they're just more talented than anyone else. And really outside of those 3 programs right now, nobody should go into the year expecting a national championship, but those programs rightfully do. Michigan is 15th in the talent composite, which is good. It's one spot ahead of Penn State, second in the Big Ten. Obviously, we would like to be a little higher, and I think um, the way Jim Harbaugh has revamped the staff, certainly is kind of recruiting forward and aims to be higher in that regard. But the distance between Michigan at 15th and Ohio State at second, currently in the talent composite, is the same as the distance between. It's actually greater than the distance between Michigan and Maryland, who's down in the mid 30s. So it's it's two programs who are they compete for some of the same kids, but there are also kids on Ohio State that Michigan does not compete for, and it's an uphill battle. So I think this team is better equipped than many of the recent Michigan teams to go out and be competitive and try to win this game. I also think Michigan fans need to be a little realistic in that even though we've had a great year and have made the necessary changes this past offseason to soon be on Ohio State's level, I personally don't know that we're there yet. So I expect a competitive game and I expect a great game plan, but I'm still looking at this matchup from the perspective of I need to see it before I say Michigan is arrived and on the level with this program.
Yeah, I agree completely. This matchup kind of reminds you of, like you mentioned, the 90s. I believe it was 96 through 98. Ohio State was a top 5 team every season. And I think Michigan won 3 in a row there.
Mm-hmm.
So, the main difference, and you pointed to it there, is the talent gap then was not nearly what it is now. I mean, yeah, Ohio State was rated higher, but higher in the polls, but the talent gap, you're talking about two pretty equal programs. I mean, they had some extremely talented teams, but obviously Michigan did as well during that time. And I think too, a thing to point out is, you mentioned the gap between Ohio State and Michigan, like how wide it is, not just from the numbers 3 to 15. I think it's important to note that they, in this game specifically, that talent seems to kind of bear out a little bit more. People will mention their loss this year and their close games. Michigan never seems to get a bad game from Ohio State. They always seem to play very well. And if they're both playing very well, the talent gap is big enough that it's nearly impossible to overcome. I think in order for Michigan to win, they're going to have to play near perfect football and capitalize on hopefully a few Ohio State mistakes. If you remember 2019 game, we talked about it a little bit this week. Michigan was right in it, and a few critical errors at the end of the first half, and all of a sudden, middle of third quarter, they're pulling away. If Michigan makes those same critical errors, they will, suffer the same fate that team did. If Michigan hangs in there during, when things get a little tough, and doesn't make those critical errors, I think they have a chance. I just think they're going to have to play. They're going to have to play a near perfect game in order to win, and it can be done. There certainly is a path to win. I believe the advanced statistics said right around a 25% chance to win the game. I did see the line has moved up to 8 for the game. So I'm with you. I'm not going to feel confident that Michigan can win again until they do. Or that Michigan will win until they do. I think they can win. I think there's a way, but I'm just not going to expect it until I see it. So it seems to be, I think, kind of, I've complained about this narrative in the past, but there seems to be a little bit of renewed focus this offseason and throughout the season on Ohio State. Whether that means anything on Saturday remains to be seen. But overall, it's a tall task, both sides of the ball. So, do we have any prize picks for this week? Or
Yeah, I can pull up. I think let's see if they have them up by now.
we're recording a little bit earlier than usual, so that's kind of why I asked it that way. Usually we have them on Thursday. I just didn't know if they were out yet for Saturday.
Yeah. I did not do well against Maryland. I had the Hassan Haskins over in rushing yards and the Talia over in passing yards, and neither of those hit. So
yeah, I think I had the same there. Did we hit Cade though? Didn't we? At least.
Yeah, we did hit Cade. So we've got the only prize pick in the Michigan-Ohio State game right now is an over-under for Travion Henderson for Ohio State, 72.5 rushing yards for Travion Henderson.
Over.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think that's an easy over.
That number could have been like 100, 28 more yards than that, and I would have went over. I think they're going to have 100 yards rushing. And they do sub in Mayan Williams a little bit, but I think Travion's going to get the bulk of the work. So I think that will definitely be over.
Unfortunately, I agree with you.
All right, let's get into predictions. We'll start. Ronnie actually sent us his prediction to be documented, so I'll start with his. Ronnie has 41-34 Michigan. And he gave a little bit of summary of his thoughts. His reasons were it's at home. He thinks this scheme change allows them to match up better against Ohio State this year. He thinks with our offense limiting the mistakes, which has been kind of a consistent theme throughout the year. And he thinks that Michigan's edge players have an advantage over their tackles in the passing attack. So Ronnie says 41-34 Michigan. What about you, Connor?
So depending on which advanced stat you look at, Michigan has somewhere between, like you mentioned, about a 25% chance, a 1 in 4. And right now I'm looking at Parker at Stats of War on Twitter. If you're a college football advanced stat junkie, Parker has been an amazing follow on Twitter. Highly recommend. That's at Stats of War. Maybe we can get him on for a show in the off season or something. But he's got Michigan at a 25% chance to win. Bill C's numbers, if my math is correct, because I don't think he's published the win probabilities yet for this week, have it like mid 30s, like 35%. And I think ESPN's football power index has us at like 38%. I think even that's maybe a little generous. I'd probably put it right around the 30% mark. Michigan has a great team this year. I think they're maybe a cycle or two away from where they want to be in terms of the roster and the type of players they have on the roster, especially on the defensive side of the ball, more so than offense. Maybe I would even think differently if Ronnie Bell was healthy for this game. But other than that, Michigan is fairly healthy. I expect Michigan to come out and throw their best punch. I think they're going to have a really good plan, and I think you're going to see some of the best football that Michigan has played this year. But like we were just talking about, I just don't think it's enough quite yet. this Ohio State offense is like historically good. They are 5 points better. So in Bill Connolly's SP Plus numbers, they're the number one offense with a offensive rating of 47.2. In SP Plus, that means against the average college football defense, they'd be expected to score 47.2 points. The number two offense in the country is Alabama, a full 5 points below Ohio State. And the gap between Ohio State at number one and Alabama at number two is the same size as the gap between Alabama at number two and Cincinnati at 12. Like this Ohio State offense is incredible. And I just don't think Michigan is going to have enough, especially on the defensive side of the ball, to completely contain them for 4 quarters. Like you said, if Michigan wins, it's going to be because they're at least +2 in turnovers, and it might even require like a touchdown or a near touchdown in like special teams or a defensive touchdown, something other than the offense contributing on the scoreboard. If this game is played 10 times, I certainly think there's a few outcomes where Michigan is the winner, but I can't go so far as to predict it this weekend. It'll be competitive for a while, but I think in the end, Ohio State will pull away. I'm going to say Ohio State 42-30. I think it's probably like a 35-27 game late, and Michigan probably kicks a field goal and then can't get a stop on defense to get the ball back and try to win. So 42-30, and I think it's a fun game and great atmosphere, and it's exactly what you want for Michigan to be playing for everything in the last game. But it's just Michigan, I don't think, is quite on that level yet to predict a victory.
Yep, I was very close to that score. I'll adjust mine a little bit just to be under on both your numbers there. But I had 42-28. So I'll go 41 to 28.
This is right model of predicting.
That's right. So I agree with a lot of what you said. I think historically, under Harbaugh, they've come out aggressive, especially offensively. I think you kind of said it right. Either their best swing. I think they're going to be aggressive. I think the offense does limit the mistakes, as Ronnie mentioned. But I just think it's too tall of a task from a talent standpoint for Michigan to pull it out. There is a path to victory. I think, you get ahead on them early, maybe something similar to like the 2017 game where you're up, 14-0 or 14-7, and you make a big play on defense. In the 17 game, Michigan failed to make that play. I think there is that path, but I just don't see it all. As I mentioned earlier, I feel like it has to be perfect, and I just don't see that happening in an Ohio State game. It hasn't in a while, and I don't anticipate that to change. So unfortunately, I think Michigan loses 41-28. Any other thoughts on this weekend before we shut it down for Thanksgiving and get ready for the game?
Nope. If anyone that's listening is going, like I am, just be loud and make it a good atmosphere, because it's also going to be a big recruiting weekend for Michigan. Don't anybody go up to parents of recruits and ask them why they even came, like someone did to Walter Nolan's mom during the Washington game. But just enjoy it. It's a lot. What's that?
Is he going to be there? I know there hasn't been any reports yet, but right after he committed to A&M, he visited Tennessee, and he's mentioned all throughout his process still, visiting Michigan for the Ohio State game. I wouldn't be surprised if we get a report in the next couple of days that he's going to be there.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. Especially how his recruitment is gone. He took an official to Tennessee immediately after committing to A&M.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't surprise me if he's there. We know Damani Jackson's going to be there. There's going to be multiple big recruits there. Obviously, some of the commits will be there as well. Will Johnson's going to be there for sure. So it's going to be a big recruiting weekend, and regardless of what happens in the game, make it a great environment, because it won't take it won't require a Michigan win to get some of these recruits, and part of the task to catch Ohio State is to get more talent on the roster and build out that roster to look more like Ohio State's. So some of the people that will help Michigan close this gap are going to be on the sideline this weekend. And if you're going to the game, show up, be loud, and be supportive, and good fans.
Yeah, and enjoy the game. Enjoy it's been a good season, regardless of outcome. It'll be one of the best seasons in memory, with a win. So I think, as you mentioned earlier, it's a great spot to be in, playing for this last weekend. So enjoy being back to that spot. We've had it a couple times under Harbaugh with 18 and 16. But prior to Harbaugh, it's been since 2006 since we've had these type of stakes on the game. So enjoy that. I really can't wait. I'm not nervous yet. I'm more just excited. I don't know that I'll get that nervous for this game. But yeah, looking forward to it. I appreciate the time this week. We'll be back to recap it all next week. For Contown and Ronnie, I'm Matt. And as always, go blue.